Comments and opinions expressed on Writers in Focus are those of the individual participants and are presented for the purpose of discussion only. No endorsements by Atlanta Fulton Public Library System or Fulton County government are intended, and none should be presumed. Hi, welcome to Writers in Focus. I'm your host, James Taylor, and today I'm delighted to have as my guest one of America's finest poets, Jericho Brown. May I call you Jericho?
You are welcome to call me Jericho.
I'd like to welcome you to the Atlanta Fulton Public Library.
Thank you for having me here. I know we were like, is he ever going to come? I've
been
traveling a lot, but I'm glad I made it.
Traffic is bad out there.
Well, it's not just that. It's just, you know, we had a date, and then we had a new date, and then we had a new date, and we kept sort of pushing back the date. So I'm going to leave here, and I'm going to teach my class.
Okay.
So we're together in this moment. We're having our Buddhist moment together.
You got it. So to all those Buddhists out there, namaste. But I want to say to the audience that my guest, Jericho Brown, is a real, live, authentic poet. He's the author of Please, a book that you'll read from in a few moments, now in its fifth printing with about 5,000 copies, 6,000 copies in print, which is extraordinary for any poet in America. You teach creative writing and English at Emory University. You're the recipient of several major fellowships, including two from the National Endowment for the Arts, one from Radcliffe and Harvard University, 2 travel fellowships to the Krakow Poetry Institute. Your book, Please, came out in 2009 and it won the American Book Award. Before embarking on your academic career, you were a speechwriter for Mayor Marc Morial of New Orleans. You've been published in most of the major literary journals. Not only that, you've been published in The Nation magazine and The New Yorker magazine. Well, I don't believe you've ever been published in The New Yorker magazine. I'm just kidding. But a conversation to me, Jericho, is like a tuning. So give me a second to tune our instruments, our voices and my hearts and my mind. I saw you in 2009 talking to Natasha Trethewey, the Poet Laureate of America. And you were talking about being in New Orleans and seeing these amazing musicians. And you would come out of the club or you'd sit down with a musician after a performance and you thought something magical, supernatural had happened. Then you realized that these people were just human beings. I'm like you with musicians. You're a real poet. Do you ever feel that you're in touch with some kind of magic?
I hope so.
Yeah.
You know, I hope that part of what poets, you know, it's almost taboo to say so, but part of what poets are dealing with is this connection to some spiritual realm. And I think that spiritual realm is we reach it through the rhythm that we make through language. You know, poetry is not just conversational language, and it's not just language in and of itself, but it is language set to music. And there is something about music that sends us into a certain amount of ecstasy. And so when you match music with words and their meaning, you're matching music and meaning, then you end up with poetry. You've manipulated words into song. And that manipulation, I think, is something that very often leads us to some sort of higher epiphany or higher sense of transcendence. And hopefully the poets who are doing that manipulation are very aware of that power. I mean, I would like to say that I'm doing that. I know that when I read the poets I love, I'm blown away in a way where I feel much more closer to the fact of myself being human and the fact of there being something greater than just this body to my soul, you know. So
when I read your poetry, they're close to perfect, and I'm not making that up. You also have a PhD, so I'm going to defer academically to you. You can tell me a lot of things that I just pretend that I think I know. But there's an extraordinary amount of work in every poem that you write. But yet, when I read them, it seems like they came ex nihilo, out of like, where did this come from? It's when do you? I can understand you starting a poem. When do you stop? When do you know it's ready?
You know it's ready when you've said everything that you can possibly say, and when you've touched something, when you've made yourself aware of something that you didn't know you knew, right? When you write a poem, you end up saying things you don't expect for yourself to say. I'm always telling my students that one way of knowing you haven't finished your poem is that you've only said what you already set out to say. Part of the joy of writing poetry is discovery. Right? You follow those rhythms, you follow that language until you get to something that you didn't expect for yourself to say. And then once you even once you reach that something, you have to sort of tinker around with it and explore it and see, wait a minute, I said this very strange and odd, and is this a true thing I've said? You have to sort of put it to the test in the poem. And I think that's how you know when a poem is done. You know that you've made some sort of discovery.
Let's put this one to the test. In your volume, Please, which came out in 2009, one of my favorite poems in this is Track 3. And I want you to explain what Track 3 means, and I'll find it for you. But there's some mini Ripperton in here, and a lot of these poems have music. There's Track 5, autobiography, Track 4, Track 3. Mm-hmm. And let me ask you this question. Years ago, I asked a famous poet it was James Dickey, and I said, Jim, why you spend so much time introducing your poem? Why don't you just read it? Mm-hmm. And he told me, he said, people have the rest of their lives to read my poem. They have no idea where it comes from. Mm-hmm. So how would you introduce this poem? Well, or do you even introduce poems?
Well, I do introduce this poem, but mostly because we're of a generation now where people don't necessarily know who Minnie Riperton is.
Oh, no.
It's totally true. I have, much of, you asked about the tracks, much of what's going on in this book is this love affair I have with music. And I have this poem that mentions Marvin Gaye. And I'll never forget signing books after giving this reading. And
You're not going to tell me that someone...
And, I mean, they're young people. They have no reason to know who Marvin... I can't get upset with them, And he's like, so who's Marvin Gaye? I just didn't get that part of the poem. And so I had to explain to them who Marvin Gaye is. If I was to explain who Minnie Riperton was to this sort of younger generation, I would have to say she's the biggest influence for someone like Mariah Carey, because she would hit those very high notes that you either love or that make you want to turn the radio down. So I would also say that I'm originally from Shreveport, Louisiana.
Oh, yeah.
Right, and that city has a history, and it is a part of who I am and the history that I am. Yeah. So
just biographically, you grew up in Shreveport. You went to school in Dillard, where you graduated magna cum laude. I'm just going to make you feel good about this. And we'll talk about that later. But then you went on and got a master's at the University of Houston, and then a doctorate, or how did that work?
I got an MFA at the University of New Orleans, and then I got a PhD at the University of Houston a few years later. Yeah. While I got my MFA, I was working as a speechwriter for the mayor of New Orleans. The only reason I got the PhD is because I would literally get off work at 5 o'clock or 5:30, and I would be in traffic, and then I would sit down, and I would finally make it to my class at 6 o'clock where I was studying for my MFA. And I would sit down, and I wouldn't have eaten, and I would be exhausted, and I would have sat in traffic for a good hour, and I would sometimes come in just a little bit late for class or something like that. And I remember thinking to myself, I have to have time where I do this, and this is all I do. And where I completely immerse myself in poetry and studying the craft of what I love so much. And so that's when I started the PhD program, because they offered me that time.
Wow. I can't wait anymore. Just talk about this poem.
Okay. Track 3, Back Down Memory Lane. Dangerous men park carefully, slanting oversized automobiles into the ditches that line 77th. It's Friday night in Shreveport. Checks have been cashed, bills folded and stashed into wallets and bra straps. Card tables, folding chairs, and every gold tooth in town crowd our grandmother's Camelback shotgun house because gambling's illegal in Shreveport, and she cuts only $2 a hand for every joker that slides into a queen. We don't know. Minnie Riperton's dead, years now, buried with one breast to her name. School uniformed in a corner, we learn to listen to music over hollers, through smoke. Her soprano comes across a photograph in giggles, but ends up crying. Save me. We think we'd like that kind of love, sad and steeped in trumpets, though a block up the entire decade shoots for words to put in the dictionary. Crackhead, drive-by, loss, and gain. The bullet meant for a man named Money removes his baby sister's chin. Ask for horns in Shreveport, and sirens are on the way. We can't hear either. Grandmama calling for us to change the tape. No more slow songs. Keep us awake. These years before surgeons slice her in vain, and we drive away, our car stereos playing rhythm and blues.
You brought me up, and I'm coming slowly back down to earth. That was beautiful. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
This is going to be from my heart. When I was a kid, I loved poetry without understanding it. I loved the words of Yeats, Dylan Thomas, even Robert Frost. I didn't get it until, I didn't understand the imagery until college, graduate school, and stuff like that. And does that make any sense what I'm saying? Like, this poem is accessible, even, I'm going to go back and read it again and again and again. But there are some poets in America and in the world who seem to me purposefully obfuscate. In other words, they conflate obscurity with gravitas. These words are accessible. Hell, do you know what I'm? Okay, you're saying it's not just me.
Well, I do.
You're the professor. Professor Brown, I don't understand. I've heard people say to me, I don't get poetry.
Well, there are two things that I have to say about that. One thing is that some people do enjoy obscurity. Some people enjoy a puzzle. Some people do enjoy putting things together and spending a lot of time trying to figure something out. And some people don't. Some people don't understand why that would be the mode of getting a feeling across, right? And I think at the base of poetry, we're trying to work with feelings. We're working with emotions. We want readers to have an emotional reaction. But I also think that often what readers do when they read a poem is they go into the poem with a certain set of expectations instead of allowing the poem to do its work on them. I always use the example of one of my favorite singers. I talked about Minnie Riperton. Now I'm going to talk a little bit about Anita Baker, who was a singer I loved when I was a kid, although I couldn't understand.
She mumbles sometimes,
It's gorgeous, but I had no idea one word in any song. I remember my cousins and I would get together and we would sing, like on long trips, we would sing Anita Baker song, and they all just sounded like,
right.
We didn't know what she was saying, but we knew when a song was happy. We knew when a song was sad. We knew when heartbreak had occurred. We understood the emotions of the songs because she knew how to deliver them. And I think of poetry in the same way. I think that instead of getting bogged down in, well, is this obscure or is this accessible, what we should do as readers, or what we should attempt to do at least, is to allow the music of the work to do its work on us, right? And we do that with music all the time. There are plenty of songs that we listen to and that we've listened to for years, and we have no idea. People could be worshiping the devil in their lyrics, and we wouldn't know it, There's this song by James Ingram that I heard the other day. I think it's called Find 100 Ways or something, right? And at some point in the song, I never noticed he said this. He says something like, she'll repay. And I'm like, repay? And I just had this moment where I was like, she'll repay? It's this really, really interesting things that happen in lyrics, but that didn't stop me from all these years enjoying that song, And I think we have to do a similar thing with works of poetry. We have to simply go with it, right? And in our going with it, let it sort of wash over us.
I'm going to ask you a dumb question, but I can be very dumb myself. Why does it seem that I associate poetry, professional poetry, with the academy. I mean, you're at Emory, but you're with the Poet Laureate of the United States. You're with Kevin Young. I mean, these extraordinary people. But why is it that poetry is not more accessible the way popular music is? It seems to me that your book, Please, could be put it in the front of a bookstore. People are going to buy it. They read it. This is great.
Yeah, it's interesting you would say that, because some people have said the very opposite thing about this book.
Okay.
I mean, it's an interesting thing, because I hear both. I hear both all the time. And I really think it's really individual. I think what is accessible to one person may very well be difficult or obscure to another person. I do think that it is problematic that anyone who reads thinks that there's this entire genre that they just can't get, right? For instance, when I watch movies, I know I don't want to watch a scary movie, but it's not because I don't get it. It's because I don't want to be scared. You know what I mean? I don't want to watch horror films because I don't really like being scared. But I don't know if that's the same reaction that people have to poetry. What I do know is that poems are there for people whenever people want them, and that there are plenty of poems that people are attracted to, or people find themselves attracted to, even when they'll say, "Oh, I don't like poetry." And part of the reason they say that is that something has been beaten to them about meaning, right? In 5th grade or I don't know, 10th grade or something, they had some teacher, hit them with a ruler because that's not what it means. Well, that's not really how we read poetry. I wouldn't want anyone reading my book thinking, oh, this means A, and oh, this means B. And that's not what I'm trying to get to when I write a poem. That's not what I'm trying to get at. I'm trying to get at something much deeper than that, right? I mean, what does God mean? People believe in God. People go to church. What does God mean? Right? People hear sermons about a piece of scripture. For every single piece of scripture, there are several sermons. That doesn't stress people out, And I think the same thing might be the case for poetry. People have been misled into believing you don't get it. And so they sort of put this inside themselves.
I love what you're saying.
I don't get it.
Yeah.
When in actuality, they probably would have enjoyed poetry a lot better if they just would read the poem and move on with their lives. You don't have to get it. You just enjoy it and you move on.
In 2009, you were talking with Natasha Trethewey. And Natasha, I say Natasha like I know where I don't. Professor, we worship Miss Trethewey. Miss Trethewey said, look, who are you writing for? And you said, and I thought it was profound, you said, I'm writing for people who aren't even alive yet. And Ms. Trethewey said, she quoted Voltaire by saying, we give respect to the living and we try to give truth to the dead. You're writing even for people who are past. Does that make any sense?
Yeah.
I mean, it's...
Well, we want our writing to happen...
I'm not saying pseudo-profound, but
No,
profound.
We want our writing to happen on a continuum. We want our writing to, I'm not going to be here always. I'm going to die. I know people are now crying that I've made that announcement. It came to them as such a huge surprise. But I am going to die. People are going to die. And part of what everyone wants to do, whether they're a poet, whether they're a mechanic, you want to do something while you're alive, but you also want that something to last, right? I mean, part of the reason people have this drive even to have children is because they want something of themselves to last. We have this within us, right? We understand that I can be here even after I'm gone. And so what I mean for my poems to do is to have the same effect on someone else that Sylvia Plath's poems had on me. I'm way too young to have been here when Sylvia Plath was alive, but that doesn't mean that her poems didn't have this huge, profound effect on me, that they did not change my life, that they did not change the way I see the world. Now, back to what we were saying about meaning, when I think about Sylvia Plath, and I think this way about Dickinson too, because I remember being a very small kid in the library and reading poems by Emily Dickinson and not having an idea of what they were. I heard a fly buzz when I died. I'm like, how'd you do that?
That's what I was getting at earlier. I mean, I loved Dickinson as a kid, but I didn't know what they meant.
But I also remember liking trees.
Okay.
And climbing trees.
Okay.
And looking at a tree and saying,
Joyce Kilmer trees?
Yeah,
Or,
any tree.
All right.
And I think my relationship to poetry, I mean, I'm sort of lucky because a lot of people have had this sort of beaten out of them. I think my relationship to poetry is the same as it was when I had relationships to trees. When I was a kid, I would look at a tree and I would think, oh, that's a great tree. I got to climb that thing. I got to see how high I can get on it, And I just love trees. I love to play on trees, right? I didn't think the tree had to have meaning, right? And I think that often we have to see poems the same way we see trees, right? That their beauty is because they are. Their beauty is the organism that it is, right?
When did you know you wanted to be a poet? I have this, in one of your poems you talk about, well, I've done some research, Jericho, and I know that your parents are very religious people.
Yeah.
Your father was very
fundamentalist, evangelical,
from
hellfire.
from that hotbed of artistic development, Shreveport. So did you
cosmopolitan?
And you're eating eggs with your father in one of those poems. It's great imagery. But did your parents ever say how's college going? What's your major? And you said I'm studying poetry, and they roll their eyes.
Yeah, I actually lied to my parents the entire time I was in school because my dad wouldn't allow me to be an English major. I was an English major in undergrad because I was actually very clear about what I wanted to do with my life from the time that I was about 10 years old.
Seriously?
Yeah,
Wow.
I understood. I don't know why or how, but I understood very clearly that I wanted to be a writer. I spent a lot of time in libraries when I was a kid growing up.
Your mother used to drop you off.
Yeah, my mom would drop us. I mean, she couldn't afford child care, so she would drop us off at the library.
Thank God
She's
for
the
public
smartest.
libraries.
Yeah, I mean, she was like, my sister and I, we would read all these books. I had read The Witches of Eastwick by the time I was 9 years old.
Wow, Updike,
All because it had been a movie that my parents didn't allow me to see. And so I was like, oh, well, somebody's made this movie into the book,
It's a lot dirtier than the movie.
So my love affair with writing and with poetry is a very old one. I remember telling my father I was going to be an English major and I remember getting one of my professors to let him know one time when he was visiting that English majors do really well in law school. And so as long as my father thought I was going to law school, I could buy some time. Like I bought 4 years without having to deal with the wrath of my father having, gone to school. And I paid for school myself. My dad didn't pay for me to go to school. So I wasn't really trying to be the business major that he was much more interested in me being. I was trying to follow the thing that I loved to do. And what I loved to do was to read and to write. And I wanted to spend more time doing that.
Speaking of which, I want you to read one more poem. And I've been waiting, Jericho, I've been waiting all my life to do this. I'm at a cocktail party or I'm, at home and someone says, I have a poem in the New Yorker. And I'm going to say, oh yeah, what New Yorker? What magazine do you read? And well, I happen to have the May 27th, 2013 New Yorker. Yeah. And for those of you out here, ladies and gentlemen, this is almost the apogee of accomplishment for poets to get a poem into the New Yorker magazine. People still read the New Yorker magazine. This is Jericho Brown reading Colosseum, and it's the actual May 27th, 2013.
I can't believe this.
I love it too.
Okay, I'll read Colosseum.
Please.
Colosseum. I don't remember how I hurt myself. The pain mine long enough for me to lose the wound that invented it, as none of us knows the beauty of our own eyes until a man tells us they are why God made brown. Then that same man says he lives to touch the smoothest parts, suggesting our surface area can be understood by degrees of satin. Him I will follow until I am as rough outside as I am within. I cannot locate the origin of slaughter, but I know how my own feels, that I live with it, and sometimes use it to get the living done, because I am what gladiators call a man in love. Love being any reminder we survived.
That's beautiful.
Oh, thank
That's
you so
beautiful.
much.
I mean, again, you take me out of the corporeal world and you bring me down.
I'm glad.
Ladies and gentlemen, I've been
Thank
talking to Jericho Brown. He's written a book that was won the American Book Award in 2009, 6,000 copies in print. He is a major American poet, and we've just got a little bit of time left. Your current mentor is the Poet Laureate of the United States, Natasha Trethewey. Talk about Dr. Rudolph Bird. This is for Dr. Rudolph Bird. 45 seconds.
I met Dr. Bird when I was 19 years old. The man
Wow.
taught me how to read. You know,
No.
the thing I was doing before was reading and enjoying, but he really taught me how to see in myself and to follow what I believed in and to love what I love in what I read. Right?
Wow.
And he's a very different kind of guy than I am, but we would meet in the middle because what he was a fan of literature.
Yes, he was.
You know,
Yes, he was.
He loved good writing.
Yeah, he touched my life, and he was your mentor. This was wonderful. Thank you for being here.
Thank you so much.
Thank
for
you.
having me.
Thank you.
This is great.
And that's there'll be a few cutaways and. Comments and opinions expressed on Writers in Focus are those of the individual participants and are presented for the purpose of discussion only. No endorsements by Atlanta Fulton Public Library System or Fulton County government are intended, and none should be presumed.